Hi, I'm the son they forgot. 8 years, nothing, not a call, not a word. Then, one night, out of nowhere, my parents invited me home for dinner, like we were still a family. But before I could knock, the housekeeper met me at the gate, eyes darting, hands trembling, and all she said was, "Don't go in there. Leave now." I stayed outside. 9 minutes later, I realized. She wasn't warning me for my safety. She was warning me about them, and the truth I saw from the shadows. It shattered everything I thought I still belonged to. What kind of family sets a trap, just to take back what they never earned? And if I hadn't listened to her, would I even be here telling you this? The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, quiet enough that I almost missed it. I was at home, sorting through paperwork I'd put off for weeks, the kind of routine task that fills the hours without asking much of you. When I saw the number, I didn't answer right away. I just stared at the screen, letting it ring once, twice, 3 times. It had been 8 years since anyone from that house tried to reach me. 8 years since the last conversation ended without a goodbye. I didn't ask myself why now. I learned a long time ago that when family resurfaces after silence like that, it's rarely because they miss you. There's usually a price attached. The message was brief. Dinner, tonight, 6:30. No apology, no explanation, just an address I already knew by heart. I was in my 40s now, settled into a life that worked because it didn't depend on them. A steady job, a small place of my own, routines I trusted. Distance had done what arguments never could. It gave me room to breathe. Still, something in that message pulled at me. Not hope exactly, but curiosity mixed with caution. I told myself I'd go, not to reconcile, but to see what they wanted. I left the house as the light began to fade, the sky already turning that flat gray that comes with late fall. The drive felt longer than it was. Every mile brought back pieces of memory I didn't invite. I shut them down as they surfaced. Nostalgia has a way of smoothing over the parts that matter most, and I wasn't in the mood to be fooled by it. Their street looked exactly the same. Trim lawns, identical mailboxes, porch lights timed to switch on at dusk. The house sat there like it had been preserved, almost staged, as if nothing difficult had ever happened inside. That was always part of the problem. From the outside, everything looked fine. I parked across the street and sat for a moment with the engine running. I could have walked straight up to the door. That was the polite thing to do. Instead, I took my time. I checked the mirrors. I watched the windows. There was movement inside, but not the kind you'd expect before a quiet family meal. It felt busy, organized. I stepped out of the car and closed the door gently, more out of habit than fear. The air was sharp, carrying the smell of damp leaves and cold pavement. As I reached the gate, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, expecting one of my parents. Instead, it was her. She had worked for them longer than I could remember. She used to bring us lemonade in the summer, remind us to wipe our feet in the winter. She looked older now, thinner somehow, her shoulders drawn tight like she was carrying something heavy. She didn't smile when she saw me. She didn't greet me at all. She glanced up and down the street before speaking, her eyes moving quickly, like she was afraid of being seen. "Don't go in there," she said, barely louder than the wind. "Leave. Now." There was no drama in her voice, no exaggeration, just urgency, plain and raw. I didn't ask her why. I didn't need to. Fear like that doesn't come from nothing. She stepped back immediately, as if she'd already said too much, and hurried toward the side of the house without looking at me again. I stood there, my hand resting on the gate, the weight of her words settling in. Every instinct told me to knock anyway, to pretend I hadn't heard her. That was how I'd survived most of my life with them. Be agreeable, don't make trouble. This time I stepped back instead. I moved slowly, casually, until I was out of sight of the front door. There was a large oak across the street, its branches bare, its trunk wide enough to shield me. From there, I could see the house clearly without being obvious. I told myself I was just being careful. The truth was, I wanted to know what I was walking into before I crossed that threshold. Time stretched in a way it only does when you're waiting for something you can't control. I noticed the small things. A light flicked on in the dining room. Shadows passed behind the curtains. A car idled briefly in the driveway, then shut off. Laughter drifted through an open window, a little too loud, a little too practiced. I checked my watch once, then again. 9 minutes can feel like nothing or everything, depending on what you're expecting. I didn't fully understand the warning I'd been given, but I trusted it more than the invitation that brought me there. I checked my watch as the 9th minute passed, and that was when the front door finally opened. The door opened. I stayed exactly where I was, half hidden behind the trunk of the oak tree, the dim streetlight breaking the sidewalk into uneven patches of yellow and gray. From there, I could see the front steps clearly, but anyone inside would have to be looking for me to notice. I wasn't frozen by fear. I was choosing not to announce myself. The door swung wide, and warm light spilled out onto the porch. Voices followed. Not the quiet kind you hear before a family meal, but the brisk, overlapping sounds of coordination. Someone called out for coats to be taken. Someone else asked if the wine had arrived yet. That alone told me more than any apology ever could. My father appeared first, jacket already on, checking his watch like a man waiting for an arrival, not hosting a reunion. My mother followed, smoothing the front of her blouse, her face composed in that familiar way that meant everything was under control, or at least meant to look that way. Then others moved past them. People I didn't recognize. Men in tailored coats. A woman with a folder tucked under her arm. Another couple laughing too loudly, the kind of laughter meant to fill space, not share joy. One by one, they stepped inside, greeted with practiced warmth. This wasn't a family dinner. It was an event. A catering van pulled up briefly, hazards blinking, and a man unloaded metal trays before disappearing around the side of the house. I caught the faint smell of roasted meat and bread, carried on the cold air. It felt deliberate, planned. Nothing about this night had been thrown together. I shifted my weight slightly, careful not to make noise, and leaned closer to the hedge lining the property. Through the large front window, I could see into the dining room. The table was fully set, linen cloth, polished silverware, printed place cards standing neatly at each setting. I scanned them slowly. My mother's name, my father's, my older brother's, written in the confident slant he always preferred. A few names I didn't know, likely colleagues or partners of some kind. I counted again, just to be sure. There wasn't a seat that made sense for me, not one tucked awkwardly at the end, not one added as an afterthought. Nothing. The absence wasn't accidental. It was precise. That was the moment the last thread of uncertainty snapped. Whatever this invitation was, it had never been about welcoming me back. I wasn't expected to sit down. I wasn't expected to be part of the evening at all. I felt something shift inside me, but it wasn't anger. It was distance. The kind that comes when you finally stop misreading a situation and see it for what it is. A window near the kitchen was cracked open. just enough to let steam escape. I could hear fragments of conversation drifting out, carried by the same air that numbed my hands. He'll understand once it's explained properly. We just need him here, that's all. It's cleaner if he hears it tonight. The voices weren't raised. They didn't need to be. The calmness was what made it worse. People speak like that when they believe the outcome is already decided. I didn't catch who said what. It didn't matter. The message was clear enough. My presence wasn't welcome. It was required. I thought about stepping forward then, about knocking on the door, forcing them to acknowledge me. The image passed quickly. Confrontation would have given them control of the timing, the narrative. That had never worked in my favor before. So I stayed where I was. I pulled my coat tighter, more from instinct than cold, and focused on what was happening instead of how it felt. Leaving now would have spared me the rest of it. Staying meant seeing the whole shape of what they were doing. I chose to stay. The laughter inside grew louder as more guests arrived. Glasses clinked. Someone made a joke about traffic. Normal sounds layered over something deeply wrong. I watched the house fill up, watched the evening take form without me. That was when I understood something worse than rejection. I wasn't forgotten. I was included in a different way. I was part of a plan. Stayed where I was, letting the hedge press lightly against my coat, the chill seeping through the fabric. The house had settled into its rhythm now. Voices blended together, glasses clinked, a door closed somewhere inside. That steady noise did something unexpected. It pulled my thoughts backward, not in a rush, but slowly, the way quiet always does. I didn't see my life replay in scenes. It came back in fragments, small moments, decisions made without asking me. I remembered being told plans had changed after I'd already taken time off work. Hearing about a family gathering from someone else's photos. Being thanked for understanding when no one had actually explained anything. Each memory surfaced briefly, sharp and contained, then slipped away. No shouting, no tears, just the same pattern repeating itself. 8 years hadn't happened by accident. Standing there, I could finally admit that to myself. Being the youngest had always meant being optional. If I showed up, fine. If I didn't, that was fine too. It was framed as freedom, but it worked more like permission to ignore me. I learned early not to protest, not because I agreed, but because arguing never changed the outcome. It only made things harder. For a long time, I told myself that was maturity, that being reasonable meant absorbing disappointment without comment. I took pride in staying calm, in not escalating situations that were already uncomfortable. Looking back now, I could see the cost of that choice more clearly than ever. My silence had taught them something about me. It taught them I would adapt, that I would accept whatever version of events they offered, that I would show up when called and step aside when necessary. They didn't need to push harder because I'd already learned how to move myself out of the way. I wasn't angry thinking about it, not in the way people expect. It felt more like taking inventory, acknowledging a mistake without dramatizing it. I had believed endurance was strength. What it had really been was predictability. From the outside, my absence had been explained neatly. I was busy. I was difficult to reach. I liked doing my own thing. Those were the phrases that floated around, passed along to neighbors, relatives, anyone who asked. No one ever said I'd been edged out. No one mentioned the quiet decisions that added up over time. It made everyone comfortable, including me, for a while. Another burst of laughter drifted through the open window, louder than before, a little forced. I shifted my stance, easing the pressure off my leg, and let my attention return to the present. The memories had done their job. They'd given shape to what was happening now. Tonight wasn't about reopening old wounds. It was about leverage. Whatever they were planning required my presence, or at least my cooperation. The invitation, the timing, the careful setup inside the house. None of it pointed toward reconciliation. It pointed toward utility. I was useful again, and that was why I was here. That realization sharpened everything. I stopped replaying the past and started observing with purpose. Who moved where? Who spoke? And who listened? The way my father leaned in when certain names came up. The way my mother kept glancing toward the door as if checking for something unfinished. I noticed details I might have missed before. How rehearsed the conversation sounded. How often my brother nodded without adding anything. This wasn't just a gathering, it was coordinated. The noise inside rose and fell, comfortable and contained, while I stood just outside its edge. I wasn't rushing anymore. I wasn't weighing whether to leave. I was waiting. They thought time had softened me, worn down whatever edge I once had. Standing there in the dark, I understood how wrong that was. All it had really done was teach me how to wait. They thought time had softened me, but all it had really done was teach me how to wait. And I was still waiting. From my spot near the hedge, under the dim orange wash of the street lamp, I watched the front door stay open just long enough to let in 3 more guests, none of whom I recognized. They didn't knock. They weren't greeted with hugs or smiles. No warm welcome, no, we've missed you. Just nods, brief handshakes, clipped introductions that didn't carry any real warmth. I shifted my weight slightly, careful not to snap any twigs beneath my shoes. The light from the dining room poured onto the polished hardwood floor like a theater stage, and everyone inside played their parts. The table now sat nearly a dozen people, suits, blazers, dresses that didn't say family dinner. They said business. The air was too controlled, the voices too careful. No kids running around, no inside jokes. It was the kind of silence that meant the wrong words would cost someone something. A woman with perfect posture took a seat next to my father. She placed a thick folder on the table like it belonged there. He didn't flinch. That folder hadn't come from a purse or a briefcase. It had been brought with purpose. None of this was about family. I scanned the room again. My brother was there, of course he was. His tie was just a little too tight, his smile pinned in place. His wife, Karen, sat beside him with that familiar way of pretending she was in charge. My mother had her company voice on, the one that made everything sound agreeable, even when it wasn't. What was I looking at? This wasn't reconciliation. This wasn't even nostalgia. It was strategy. The way people glanced toward the door told me everything. They were still waiting for someone specific. And I knew now that someone was me, but not because they missed me. No, I was the final piece on the board. They needed me there, not to speak, not to contribute, just to sit, to be seen. My presence would say something they couldn't, that the family was intact, functioning, whole, that whatever they were about to do had everyone's support. They wanted my face as a signature, nothing more. A few months ago, my father's name had shown up in a business journal, small real estate deal that got messy. There were whispers about something being swept under the rug. Back then, I didn't care. We weren't in touch. But now, I wondered if that deal had left cracks. if tonight's dinner was about patching them up before someone else noticed. A man at the far end of the table, mid-50s, expensive watch, not one of ours, was holding court now. He was talking while others listened. No small talk, no toasts. I couldn't hear the words, but the tone said enough. This wasn't a celebration, and still, one chair remained empty. The one at the center of the long side of the table, directly facing the door. I looked at it for a long time. That was my seat. They dressed it with intent. White napkin folded just so, a water glass untouched. Not because they wanted me to feel welcome, because they needed the illusion that I was part of this. It hit me then, harder than I expected. They never actually expected me to speak. They just expected me to show up and nod. I wasn't there to approve anything. I was there to appear as though I had. All those years of silence weren't a break. They were groundwork. My absence had made me neutral, almost clean. No drama, no scandal, no recent ties. The black sheep becomes useful when the rest of the flock is stained. I exhaled slowly. No anger, not the loud kind anyway. Just a tight coil of something deeper, moral anger. The kind that doesn't burn out. There was no chance I'd walk into that room and play along. If I stepped through that door now, I'd be locking myself into their version of things. They'd smile, nod, and later, when the papers were signed or the lies confirmed, they'd say, "Well, he was there." And everyone would believe it. Because showing up is a kind of signature too. So I stayed put. Let the wind cut across my jawline. Let the night settle a little heavier on my shoulders. Somewhere behind me, a car drove past slowly, but I didn't turn. My eyes were fixed on the table, on the way my name had already been folded into the story without my consent. And that's when I realized, if I walked in now, I'd be playing by their rules. So I didn't. Instead, I stayed still. One hand resting lightly on the hood of my car, the other deep in my coat pocket. The night had settled fully now. No more glow in the sky, just the hollow hum of a distant streetlight and the low murmur of voices drifting from the dining room windows. My breath came out in slow clouds, visible now in the cold. My legs had started to ache from standing so long. That quiet, creeping burn in the calves that says you've been still too long, but also don't move yet. And honestly, I was tired, not just physically. That kind of fatigue sits deeper, like your bones are too aware of time passing. I wasn't afraid. I was just worn down. Worn by the old patterns, the buried conversations, the weight of too many rooms like that one. Too many tables I wasn't meant to speak at. A part of me, maybe the part that still wanted peace, told me to go. Just get in the car, turn the key, let the engine warm, drive away from this old house and whatever performance they had rehearsed in there. No raised voices, no slammed doors, no emotional bloodletting. Just absence, a clean exit. There was appeal in that. Dignity, simplicity. I thought about how that would look if I told anyone later. I showed up, saw the truth, and left without a word. They'd say I handled it with maturity. They'd nod, impressed by the restraint, and I could almost see myself doing it, slipping into the driver's seat, headlights cutting through the quiet street, letting the rearview mirror carry this house into the past again. But the truth? That kind of escape only looks clean from the outside, because on the inside, you're still bleeding. You're just doing it in private. I leaned back against the car, closing my eyes. The cold of the metal bled through my coat. I'd played this game before. Walk away, don't make waves, keep your head down. And every time I did, They rewrote the story without me in it. Smoothed out the wrinkles, made my absence about my independence or my stubbornness or just how he is. Never once had anyone said out loud, maybe we pushed him out. That silence. They wore it like armor, and I helped them build it. That's what hit hardest. Not their planning, not the pretense, but the realization that my silence had made all of this possible. I opened my eyes and looked again toward the house. Movement near the edge of the dining room. Someone had stepped into the hallway. Not my brother, not my father. A woman I didn't recognize. Late 30s, maybe early 40s, dark jacket, folder in hand. She wasn't a guest, she was working. I knew that posture, efficient, alert, not part of the scene, but integral to it. She walked quickly across the hall, glanced at a phone in her hand, then disappeared around the corner. It was such a small thing. A face I didn't know. A folder I hadn't seen before. But something about the way she moved told me this dinner wasn't the final act. It was setup. That folder wasn't decorative. It was the kind people passed across conference tables when they needed something signed. I narrowed my eyes, watching more carefully now. From the far side of the window, I caught a glimpse of my father standing, saying something that made two people lean in. My brother nodded. My mother gave one of her slow, deliberate smiles, the kind that always meant this is going exactly how we need it to. Then I heard it, faint but clear. He'll show up. He always does, eventually. The voice belonged to Karen. Her tone wasn't hopeful. It was dismissive, certain. And for a second, I felt that old pull in my chest, the urge to kick the door open, walk in, make it messy. But I didn't move, because now I knew something else. They weren't just counting on me to show up. They were counting on me to leave again, quietly, conveniently, without asking questions. The plan only worked if I stayed predictable. I stared at the front door. My reflection stared back from the dark car window beside me. I could have driven off then, but something told me they still needed me. Just shifted my weight slightly, leaning back into the driver's side door. The air had cooled enough that my breath hung in it now. Sharp, visible, real. A porch light blinked on and off twice. Not random, not a timer. A signal. The same way my father used to flick the porch light to call us in from the yard as kids, never needing to yell. We understood. One blink. Dinner. Two blinks. Now. Tonight, it was two. They weren't coming out. They expected me to step in. There was no text. No voice calling softly from the doorway. Just the porch light and the same unspoken message. We've prepared the stage. Take your cue. Except this time, I didn't follow the script. I stayed put. I pulled out my phone, stared at the screen a moment, then turned it face down on the hood of the car. The vibration buzzed a second later. I didn't flip it over. Let it buzz. Let it go to voicemail. This wasn't anger. It wasn't spite. This was the first time my silence meant no instead of whatever you want. Inside the house, something shifted. At first, it was subtle. Chairs scraped. The lighting from the front windows dipped, like someone adjusting a dimmer too quickly. Then, through the half-drawn curtain, I caught a glimpse of my brother standing, walking out of the dining room toward the front hallway. The look on his face wasn't confusion. It was irritation, the kind that comes when a plan doesn't quite lock into place. He checked the front door, didn't open it, just stood there, waiting for the sound of my steps on the porch, for the doorbell, for the click of the knob. But nothing came. I gave him nothing. From where I stood, I could see the edge of the dining room again, plates pushed slightly forward, wine glasses full but untouched, small paper name cards tucked discreetly at each place setting. My name wasn't visible, but I knew where it would have been. Tucked near the foot of the table, not at the center, not where anyone would need to listen to me. Just there enough to say, he was here too. I watched my mother turn toward someone at the table. She leaned in, spoke with that smile she always reserved for company. Calculated, smooth, the kind of smile that said, "We're still in control." But her eyes kept darting toward the hallway. Then came the signal of real concern. My father stood up. He almost never stood unless something needed correcting. And tonight, that something was me. Someone new entered the frame, a man I hadn't seen before. Early 60s, expensive haircut, a briefcase placed gently beside his chair. He looked over his shoulder toward the hallway, then leaned toward my father. I couldn't hear the words, but the gesture was clear. Where is he? That was the moment the energy changed. I realized something. They didn't just want me there. They needed me. Not for connection, not for family, but for paperwork, for legitimacy. Maybe for a signature, maybe for silence, but definitely for utility. And now that I wasn't walking in on cue, the machine had started to stutter. Inside, my brother turned back toward the hallway. Someone handed him a phone. Moments later, mine buzzed again on the hood of the car. I didn't touch it. The call didn't come from anyone who cared. There was no warmth in it. Just timing. Just pressure. Letting it ring out felt like finally setting a line in stone. I walked around to the passenger side of the car and leaned against it now, arms folded. Watching the windows like a man watching the last act of a play he'd already memorized. Inside, someone paced. The outsider with the briefcase stood, gesturing quietly. My father's hands went behind his back, his version of tension. My mother sat, hands folded, lips pursed. She didn't speak. She just stared straight ahead. And that was when I knew. I wasn't a son in their plan tonight. I was a condition. I was the necessary checkmark to make whatever deal they'd lined up look clean, look wholesome, look full circle. But I'd made my decision. They wouldn't get the ending they wrote. No confrontation, no accusations, no drama. Just absence, stillness, refusal. The next call didn't come. Instead, the curtains were drawn. But I stayed where I was. Because that was the moment they realized I wasn't going to save them. Almost instantly, the energy shifted. Like a theater troupe thrown off when their lead actor never shows up. They scrambled. Lights inside flickered as someone moved hastily through the rooms. Curtains that had been drawn closed were now tugged half open again, scanning the darkness. I didn't move. I didn't give them the courtesy of confirming I was still watching. But I felt it. The heat behind the windows had changed. No more waiting. No more coaxing. The next move wouldn't be soft. It came 10 minutes later, faster than I expected. A text, short, clean, almost smug. Thanks for confirming your support. Just letting you know we'll move ahead with the filings Monday. There was no name attached, but I knew who sent it. The outside party. The man with the briefcase. The one who'd barely looked at the wine glass, who had no interest in the food or the family dynamics. He was here for one reason, and that reason had my name written on it. But I hadn't agreed to anything, and that was the point. They decided to proceed as if I had. The message wasn't just informational, it was strategic. It was planting evidence. If I pushed back later, they'd wave this message like a signed permission slip. Inside, someone was already on the phone. I saw my older sister pacing near the back wall, voice low, hands slicing the air in short, annoyed gestures. She wasn't the peacemaker tonight. She was the fixer. And she was fixing something fast. I realized then, this wasn't about my feelings. This wasn't personal. This was business, and I had become a liability. I wasn't supposed to have thoughts or boundaries. I was supposed to nod, show up, lend my name to the narrative like I'd done, silently, for years. They hadn't prepared for resistance, so now they were adjusting. By force, by fabrication, by using the one thing they'd never cared about when I was younger, my name. Another message came through, this time from my father's assistant. Same professional tone. Just confirming you'll be on Zoom for Tuesday's investor summary. Investor. There it was. The full picture. This dinner wasn't for reconciliation. It was for presentation. My presence was part of the branding. The narrative, look, the whole family is aligned. Even the quiet one came home. And now that I hadn't walked through the door, they were walking me in anyway, digitally, fictionally, paper trail style. If I waited any longer, the version they were fabricating would cement itself, not just in perception, but in filings, in minutes, in records. They were trying to bury me inside their story before I could write my own. That's when the plan I'd been holding on to cracked. I'd wanted to stay silent, strategic, detached. But silence now wasn't strength. It was consent. I took out my phone and opened my encrypted document folder. Years ago, I'd kept every version of every family agreement tucked away in digital corners they didn't know existed. Originals, notarized. Some with old email chains attached. Time-stamped. Dated. Some even showing how my name had been dropped into things I hadn't seen since 2012. I made a call, not to them, but to my attorney. Late hour, yes. But this wasn't a social visit. I forwarded 2 documents and left a one-line message. Prepare a formal statement of non-involvement and intent to contest unauthorized use of name or likeness. No drama, no rage, just the paperwork, the way they'd taught me. Inside, it didn't take long. The energy again pulsed outward like a shiver. From the corner of my eye, I saw my brother walk toward the den. He was on the phone. The briefcase man followed him with a stiff jaw, eyes narrowed. Then, just like that, someone burst back into the dining room. A voice, sharp, clear, too loud, cut through the glass. Who told him he had signing authority? Then chairs moved. Someone else shouted. My sister slammed her hand flat on the table. They weren't pretending anymore. I knew they were hoping to push it through tonight. Get me inside, seat me, smile for a few photos, let me sign something non-binding that somehow later would become very binding. But I had just made that impossible. And the beauty of it all, they didn't even know what I'd done yet. Only that something had changed. The power was gone from the room. I watched them scramble. No one looked composed now. The curated scene had shattered. They'd built this entire thing on a bet that I wouldn't stand up. But here I was, not yelling, not banging the door down, just still, present, unbought. They thought they were shutting me out, but I had just shut the door they needed open. Then the noise began. Inside the house, it was no longer a dinner. It was a battlefield. Phones rang in quick succession, drawers opened and slammed, voices overlapped in clipped, panicked bursts. I didn't need to hear every word to know the tone. They were losing control, and they knew it. The porch light flicked on. The front door creaked open a moment later, and my sister stepped outside. Her eyes swept the street like she expected me to be crouched behind a bush, or maybe waiting at the gate with some dramatic speech. I stayed where I was, leaned casually against the rental car, arms folded, not hiding, but not coming any closer either. She spotted me. No wave, no smile, just a nod. Measured. A signal. The kind we used when we were younger, trading secrets behind closed doors. But this wasn't that. A moment later, my phone buzzed. I let it ring halfway before picking it up. "Hey," she said, her voice steadier than I expected. "Can you come in for just a moment? Dad wants to." I didn't answer. "I know it's messy," she continued, "but we're trying to clean it up, okay? We need to close tonight. It has to happen now. We didn't think you'd make it this hard." That made me smile, not kindly. She hesitated. "You don't have to do anything. Just show your face. Reassure the others. You don't have to speak. They just want to see the family together. Please." Guilt. Not blunt, but there. I stayed quiet, just letting her voice fill the space. Then she added, "You know how this looks if you don't help. For you. For all of us." There it was. The threat behind the plea. Still, I didn't answer. And after a long pause, she hung up. I stared at the screen for a moment, then turned it off completely. They thought I'd been quiet before. Now I was intentional. The last card they had to play was emotion, urgency wrapped in familiarity. They wanted to pull me in without dragging me in, to make me complicit without making me speak. But that wouldn't work anymore. I opened the folder I'd prepared on my phone. There was a message already queued, not long, not dramatic, just factual. I tapped send. It went directly to the attorney of the outside party. No consent given. No participation authorized. Any use of my name, likeness, or signature in connection with tonight's meeting is unlawful. A formal cease and desist will follow. Less than a minute later, I saw the ripple. From the window, the man in the suit, briefcase guy, pulled out his phone, read something, froze, then turned to my father. Even through the glass, I could read the movement in his jaw. One of those clenches people do when the deal just fell apart, and no one knows how to fix it without looking weak. My father gestured toward the door, fast and impatient, but no one moved. The storm had turned inward now, and I didn't need to be inside to hear the thunder. I took one more step toward finality. I opened the secured document signed years ago, an old clause they probably thought I forgot, removing me entirely from any future voting interest in family business operations unless reactivated by written consent. I screenshotted it, sent it to my attorney, marked it, enforce, immediate, permanent. That was it. No speeches, no confrontation in the hallway, just a keystroke. And everything they'd tried to build tonight, this theater of unity, this curated dinner of reconciliation, crumbled. It wasn't about anger. Not anymore. This was about boundaries, and they'd ignored mine for long enough. 10 minutes passed. No more calls. No more texts. Just the glow of the house, now dimmer, now quieter, like it had finally remembered what truth feels like. I could have stood there longer, waited for someone to come out, maybe try one last plea. But I didn't need it. I'd done what I came to do. Not for them, but for me. As I walked back to my car, I knew the night wasn't ending. It was settling before driving. Not thinking, not planning. Just letting the weight of the night move through me like an old ache. The house behind me was quiet again, lit only by porch light and pride. Whatever storm was still spinning in there, it no longer belonged to me. By the time I pulled out of the driveway, the neighborhood was asleep. The streets were empty. No headlights, no motion. Just that pale, early morning blue beginning to touch the horizon. Somewhere between night and day, silence becomes its own kind of sound. A soft hum, familiar, final. I didn't feel triumphant. I wasn't angry either. I just felt done. At the next red light, I glanced at the mirror, not to check my face, but just to remind myself I was still there, still whole. There was no call from them that morning, no text, no explanation or apology. I didn't expect one, and that's exactly why I was okay. Sometimes what hurts most isn't what people do, it's what they never admit. And after all these years, I'd stopped hoping for admission. Instead, I got confirmation. Quiet, efficient, legal. The deal they'd tried to seal that night, without me, was dead in the water. The outside party had pulled out. Officially, irrevocably. My attorney forwarded the email, no commentary needed. Their attempt to sidestep me had failed in a language they finally understood. Consequences. I made coffee I didn't drink. Sat at the tiny kitchen table in my rented apartment, with its mismatched chairs and flickering overhead light. Across the street, a dog barked once, then silence returned. I hadn't slept, but my body didn't care. Adrenaline has a strange way of stretching itself thin when there's nothing left to fight. I reached for my phone again, not to check messages, but to scroll back to a photo. It was a picture from years ago. A birthday, maybe. The last one where everyone had shown up pretending to care. In the corner, just barely visible, was the old housekeeper, Maria. She wasn't looking at the camera. She never did. But I remembered her face that night. The way her eyes had lingered on mine when I was about to leave early. She didn't say anything out loud, just a whisper as I passed by. Be careful what they need you for. At the time, I thought it was fear, maybe pity. Now I know it was something else. It was integrity, the only warning that came without a price tag. She'd seen more behind those walls than any of us wanted to admit, and she never needed to speak in full sentences to say something true. I locked my phone and stared at the morning light stretching through the blinds. For so long, I'd measured my value by how quietly I could stay in the background. I thought if I didn't push, didn't argue, didn't embarrass anyone, I could still belong. That silence might earn me space. But silence isn't respect. It's delay. And I delayed long enough. They hadn't taken anything from me, not permanently. What I'd given up was mine to reclaim, not from them, from myself. I didn't need their invitation to feel whole. I didn't need their agreement to move forward. I could name who I was without their names attached to mine. And when I did, the name wasn't bitter. It wasn't broken. It was mine. The word family means different things at different times. Sometimes it's comfort. Sometimes it's camouflage. Sometimes it's a reminder of who you'll never be again. In my case, it was a lesson in limits. And that lesson stuck deeper than any reconciliation could. I didn't leave that night hoping they'd come after me. I left knowing they wouldn't, and that was the point. There's power in letting go, even when it doesn't look like victory. Peace doesn't come from getting the last word. It comes from knowing you don't owe anyone a final line. So I didn't send a message. I didn't check for one either. I opened the window, let the air move through the room. I poured the cold coffee down the sink, and I breathed. Not deeply, not dramatically, just enough to remind myself the worst had passed. I drove away knowing I hadn't lost my family that night. I had finally stopped losing myself.